Usually, when you travel thousands of miles to see a piece of history, the whole goal is to actually, look at it.
Right? I mean, that's the whole point of traveling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's this really haunting story in the source material we're looking at today from Johann Hari's book, Stolen Focus. He takes his godson to Graceland, the home of Elvis Presley.
Oh, yeah, the Jungle Room story.
Yes, so they step into the famous jungle room, and it's this incredibly distinct space. It's filled with lush, fake green plants and these waterfall walls that Elvis himself actually picked out. But nobody in the room is looking at the plants or the walls.
Every single visitor is just staring down at a screen.
Every single one. They're all wearing earbuds, just clutching these iPads provided by the tour. And at one point, this man turns to his wife, points at his tablet, and literally says, "Look, honey, if you swipe left, you can see the jungle room to the left. And if you swipe right, you can see the jungle room to the right." Right. They're physically standing inside the room, but swiping on a digital photo to see what is practically inches away from their actual faces. And when the author suggests they just, turn their heads, the couple backs away from him like he's completely unhinged.
It is really just the absolute peak of our modern disconnect. I mean, we are mediating physical reality through our devices
Hmm.
to a point that's just absurd.
It totally is. Well, welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to figure out exactly why your attention span feels like it's been completely shattered and why you, along with the rest of us, just can't seem to sustain focus anymore.
Yeah, it's something everyone is feeling right now.
Definitely. So we are analyzing this massive stack of notes and research from Stolen Focus, and the central revelation here is that your inability to put down your phone is not, it's not a personal failing.
No, not at all. And to really understand the mechanism behind this, we have to look at this framework provided by Dr. Joel Nigg. He's one of the top clinical researchers on attention, and he frames it through this really powerful analogy.
Okay, I love a good analogy.
Right, so 50 years ago, clinical obesity was relatively rare. But today, it's an absolute epidemic. And he points out that human beings didn't just suddenly experience a mass genetic collapse in personal willpower, right? We didn't all collectively decide to just become gluttonous.
No, the environment fundamentally changed. Like, we built cities designed entirely around cars, so you literally can't walk anywhere. And we just flooded the supply chain with highly processed, hyperpalatable foods.
Exactly. And Dr. Nake argues that the exact same environmental shift has happened to our cognitive landscape. We are living in what he calls an attentional pathogenic culture.
Attentional pathogenic culture, that's intense.
It is, but it's accurate. Our environment is quite literally sick, so we haven't lost our willpower. Rather, we are living in a system where sustained, deep focus is practically impossible, mostly because the environmental conditions necessary for it have just been completely dismantled.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if our inability to focus isn't just a personal failure, but an actual environmental hazard, what exactly is the toxic smog we're breathing here?
Well, to understand that toxic environment, we have to look at the speed and volume of information flooding our brains.
Yeah.
Soon Lehman, a researcher, analyzed these massive data sets to measure how long a topic stays in the public consciousness before we just get bored and move on.
And he didn't just look at a few years of Twitter, right?
No, he didn't just look at Twitter or Reddit. He actually analyzed a scan of Google Books covering 130 years of printed text. He was tracking how fast certain concepts or names spiked in popularity and then vanished.
Oh man, the trajectory of that graph has to be a vertical line by the end.
It basically is.
Yeah.
With every passing decade for the last century, topics rise and fall significantly faster. So the sheer volume of information being pumped into our society means our collective attention span for any single issue is just shrinking.
I think the note said researchers calculated that by 2007, the average person was consuming the equivalent of 174 newspapers worth of information every single day.
Yeah, 174 newspapers a day.
That is insane. We are drinking from a fire hose, and
Yeah.
that volume just forces the brain into a state of constant triage.
Right, and we try to cope with that fire hose by convincing ourselves we can process it all simultaneously. We tell ourselves, we're highly capable multitaskers.
But anyone who follows neuroscience knows multitasking is a total myth. I mean, we literally stole that word from 1960s computer processors.
Exactly. Computers actually have multiple physical cores to execute simultaneous commands. Humans co-opted the word, but biologically, we do not multitask. We just rapidly switch tasks. The human brain can only hold one or two thoughts in its conscious mind at a time.
And the research from Earl Miller at MIT shows that this rapid switching has devastating cognitive costs. Like, we tend to think of it as a harmless habit, but it's actively degrading our intelligence.
It really is.
Yeah.
And there are four distinct biological costs to this constant switching. The first is the switch cost.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, your prefrontal cortex physically routes information to different parts of the brain depending on the task.
Hmm.
So when you glance away from writing a report to read a text message, your brain has to physically tear down the neural network it was using for the report and boot up a new one for the text.
Right.
And then when you look back at the report, it has to tear down the text network and rebuild the report network.
And that rebuilding process takes a ton of time and massive amounts of energy. Like the notes highlight this shocking study looking at the IQ of office workers,
Mhm.
simply dealing with technological distractions, just receiving emails and phone calls while trying to work, caused their functional IQ to drop by 10 points in the moment.
Which is huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
That is double the short-term cognitive drop you experience from smoking cannabis. I mean, you would literally perform better at your desk job if you got stoned and did one single task, rather than being sober and constantly switching your attention to notifications.
It's a staggering metric, honestly.
Yeah.
And that leads directly into the second cost, which is the screw-up effect. Because your brain is constantly tearing down and rebuilding these networks, it loses its place.
Ah, so you have to backtrack?
Exactly. You backtrack, and in that backtracking, errors creep in. You make these fundamental mistakes you just wouldn't make if you were actually focused.
Makes total sense. And then there's the third cost, right? The creativity drain. Because true creativity requires background processing time. When you focus intensely on one thing, the rest of your brain is quietly connecting dots and forming new ideas beneath the surface.
Right, and if you constantly interrupt yourself, you rob your brain of that quiet incubation time required to form those novel connections.
Then the fourth cost?
The fourth is diminished memory. To move an experience from short-term memory into long-term memory, the hippocampus requires uninterrupted time to encode the information.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so if you spend all your mental energy jumping back and forth, the encoding process is continuously interrupted. The memory simply fails to form.
But wait, I have to push back a little here. I juggle checking emails, writing, talking to producers, monitoring news feeds all day. I mean, if I stop doing that, my whole professional system just grinds to a halt. Is it really that detrimental?
Well, think of it like juggling flaming torches. You can keep them in the air for a minute, maybe two, but eventually the system breaks down and you get burned. The average office worker is now interrupted every 3 minutes.
Every 3 minutes.
Yeah, we basically never get uninterrupted time to encode memories or build complex thoughts. It's exactly why distracted driving is now cognitively equivalent to drunk driving. The brain simply cannot process the rapid context switching fast enough to hit the brakes.
Wow. And neurologist Adam Gazzaley has a brilliant way of visualizing this physical toll. He says to picture your prefrontal cortex as a nightclub bouncer.
Oh, that's a great metaphor.
Right. Your bouncer's job is to stand at the door of your mind and filter out all the noise, the traffic outside, the phone buzzing in your pocket, the conversations nearby, just so you can actually focus on the VIP inside the club. But right now, your bouncer is besieged by a rowdy, endless mob of demands.
And when a bouncer is constantly fighting off a mob, he doesn't just get annoyed, he gets physically exhausted.
Yeah.
This constant filtering and switching requires massive amounts of glucose.
Yeah.
So when that energy runs out, you hit a wall of profound biological exhaustion, which actually takes us to the next major thief of our focus.
The exhaustion epidemic.
Huh.
Because we are demanding extreme cognitive gymnastics from brains that are chronically sleep-deprived.
Exactly. The sleep research from Charles Czeisler and Roxanne Chrishard illustrates just how dangerous this is.
Yeah.
Just as distracted driving equals drunk driving, exhaustion operates on the exact same scale. If you stay awake for 19 hours straight, your cognitive impairment equals a blood alcohol level of 0.08.
You are legally drunk.
You're legally drunk.
People hear that and they probably think, well, I'm just a little tired, but my eyes are open, I'm staring at my monitor, I'm getting things done. But the reality is much scarier. You are likely experiencing attentional blinks.
Or what researchers call local sleep.
Local sleep.
Yeah, local sleep is a fascinating survival mechanism. When the brain is pushed past its limits, entire clusters of neurons will simply shut themselves off to recover while the rest of the brain stays awake.
Wait, really?
Yes. Your eyes are open, you're nodding along in a meeting, but a localized section of your cortex is literally asleep. You are experiencing microscopic blackouts in your attention without even realizing it.
That is terrifying. Because sleep isn't just a passive state where your body powers down like closing a laptop. It's an incredibly active biological maintenance cycle.
It is. During the day, as your neurons fire, They produce metabolic waste.
Mm.
Specifically, these toxic proteins like amyloid beta. Roxanne Pritchard affectionately calls it brain cell poop.
Brain cell poop. Okay, I won't forget that term.
Right. And when you go to sleep, your brain cells physically shrink by about 60%.
Wow, 60%.
Yeah, and this allows your cerebral spinal fluid, the lymphatic system, to rush in and wash all that toxic waste out of the brain tissue. If you don't sleep enough, that flushing process is cut short. You are literally waking up and trying to perform complex cognitive tasks with a clogged, toxic brain.
And sleep also replenishes the glucose in the prefrontal cortex, right? It restocks the bouncer's energy supply. And it provides the REM sleep necessary to process emotional stress.
Exactly.
So here's where it gets really interesting to me. If we know our brains are toxic, exhausted, and desperately need to run this cleaning cycle, why do we fight it so hard with quadruple espressos and sleeping pills? I mean, drinking caffeine is basically like putting a Post-it note over your car's empty fuel gauge.
That's spot on.
It doesn't actually put gas in the tank. It just hides the warning light until the engine completely stalls.
It does. And the systemic drivers of this exhaustion are deeply embedded in how our modern world operates. It's not just personal bad habits. Historically, our evolutionary biology was completely linked to the sun.
Right.
As the sun set and the temperature dropped, we received this surge of waking drive, a final burst of energy to get back to the cave safely, and then our melatonin levels rose and we slept.
But today, the blue light emitting from our screens mimics the exact wavelength of daylight.
Yes, so we are artificially triggering that sunset survival surge at like 11 p.m. or midnight while just scrolling in bed.
Oh, yeah.
We are chemically tricking our biology into thinking the sun is still up.
And deeper than that, sleep deprivation is actively pushed by consumer capitalism. I mean, sleep is the single biological imperative where you aren't consuming anything.
Right.
You aren't buying products, you aren't watching advertisements, and you aren't generating data for tech companies. From a purely economic standpoint, your sleep is entirely unprofitable.
The entire architecture of the digital economy is incentivized to keep you awake.
So we have an overwhelmed cognitive bouncer, a toxic brain full of unprocessed waste, and an economic system that demands we remain awake and switching tasks every 3 minutes. Put all of that together, and it leads directly to the collapse of one of our most important intellectual tools, sustained, deep reading.
Yeah, the decline of reading books is well documented. But the deeper issue is that the way we consume information on screens is physically altering our neural pathways.
Like Anne Mangan's research on screen inferiority.
Yes, because when we read on screens, we don't read linearly. We're trained to scan in an F pattern, to aggressively skim, jumping around looking for the bold text or the bullet points.
And Mangan found that this manic scanning behavior actually bleeds over into how we interact with printed paper. We lose our cognitive patience. We try to skim a 400-page novel the exact same way we skim a newsfeed.
And Marshall McLuhan's famous theory, the medium is the message, perfectly encapsulates this. When you spend hours on a platform like Twitter or TikTok, the medium itself is teaching you a philosophy about the world.
What kind of philosophy?
It trains your brain that the world is incredibly fast, that even the most complex geopolitical issues can be reduced to simple, punchy statements, and that truth is determined by immediate applause and metrics.
Whereas a physical book teaches you the exact opposite philosophy. It demands that you accept the world is complex, that understanding a subject takes hours of sustained attention, and that you have to physically slow your mind down to actually grasp reality.
And slowing down is the prerequisite for entering what psychology professor Raymond Marr calls the empathy gym.
Empathy gym.
Yeah, he conducted these studies where he tested people's ability to read subtle human emotions by just showing them photos of people's eyes. And the correlation was massive. People who read more narrative fiction have significantly higher levels of empathy.
That makes sense. Reading fiction acts like a virtual reality simulator for the human mind. It forces you to engage two types of attention simultaneously. You have outward attention decoding the physical words on the page, and inward attention where you are actively simulating the thoughts, fears, and motivations of another human being.
Exactly. You are building the cognitive architecture required to understand someone else's perspective.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. Couldn't you argue that scrolling through our friends' personal updates on social media is also building empathy? We are literally reading about their lives. We're seeing photos of their kids, hearing about their struggles.
It seems like it should work that way, but Marr's research highlights a crucial distinction. Empathy requires deep immersion in a complex, sustained narrative to actually simulate another mind.
And social media doesn't give you that.
No, social media provides the exact opposite. It's disconnected, highly curated, and often just reactive fragments. You jump from a birth announcement to a vicious political argument to a cat meme in the span of 30 seconds.
Wow, yeah.
There is no time to simulate a mind. You are just reacting to stimuli. By replacing deep reading with endless scrolling, we are shutting down our empathy, Jim. We lose the cognitive stamina required to deeply understand each other.
That is terrifying. We are losing our empathy because we're losing our focus. But here's where the research takes a really surprising turn. While deep reading requires intense, laser-like focus, our brains also desperately need the exact opposite state to function properly.
Right.
We need unfocused, unstructured mind wandering.
It is arguably the most misunderstood aspect of human attention. Going back to the psychologist William James, we have historically defined attention as a spotlight.
Like Beyoncé on stage.
Exactly. Like a spotlight illuminating a stage. Your attention highlights one specific task while everything else just fades into the dark. And for decades, the assumption was that when the spotlight was turned off, the brain was dormant.
Doing nothing.
Right. But then Marcus Rachel started doing PT scans in the 1980s.
And for anyone unfamiliar, a PET scan involves injecting a mild radioactive tracer into the bloodstream to track exactly which parts of the brain are metabolizing glucose.
Exactly. So we look at the brains of people who were doing absolutely nothing, literally just staring at a blank wall, and the scans lit up like a Christmas tree. He discovered the default mode network.
So the brain is highly active when it appears to be doing nothing.
Yes. During this mind-wandering phase, the default mode network is executing three critical functions. First, it's making sense of the world, quietly untangling and connecting the events of your day.
Okay.
Second, it is engaging in mental time travel, running simulations of future scenarios so you are prepared for them. And third, it is the birthplace of true creativity.
Yeah, the notes mention the mathematician Henri Poincaré. He struggled with this monstrously complex mathematical proof for weeks using his intense spotlight focus, but just couldn't crack it.
Right.
He finally gives up, goes on a trip, and as he is simply stepping onto a bus, just letting his mind wander, the complete solution hits him in a flash of insight. The default mode network had been working on it the whole time.
Incredible.
But I've seen a famous study by Dan Gilbert that claims a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. It found that when people are daydreaming, they actually report lower levels of happiness. So what does this all mean? If letting our minds wander just leads to unhappy rumination, shouldn't we stay distracted with our devices to avoid those feelings?
Context is the crucial variable there. Mind wandering leads to unhappy rumination when you're in a high-stress, unsafe environment.
Oh, I see.
If you are deeply anxious about losing your job, paying rent, or some global crisis, turning off your spotlight allows all those immediate threats to rush into your consciousness. But when you feel psychologically safe, when you have downtime without threat, mind-wandering transitions from rumination into a profound creative gift.
And it's that safety and mental space that allows us to reach the ultimate state of human focus, flow. Discovered by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It's that state where time just melts away, your ego vanishes, and you are entirely absorbed in the task.
But flow doesn't happen by accident. It requires a single meaningful goal right at the edge of your abilities. You have to be deeply challenged, but not overwhelmed.
And currently, looking at screens is pretty much the lowest flow activity we engage in.
Absolutely. Doom scrolling requires zero skill, offers zero meaningful challenge, and actively fractures the sustained attention required to ever enter a flow state.
Okay, so we know what our brains need. We need deep reading to build empathy. We need a solid 8 hours of sleep so our cerebral spinal fluid can flush out toxic waste. We need psychologically safe mind wandering for creativity, and we need challenging tasks to achieve flow.
Right.
So if the recipe is so clear, why is it so incredibly hard for us to just put our phones down and do those things?
Because there is a multi-billion-dollar industry actively working against you. You're not just battling your own bad habits, you're fighting armies of engineers specifically tasked with hijacking your psychological vulnerabilities.
Which brings us to the magicians of Silicon Valley. I love this story about Tristan Harris. He was a childhood magician who ended up at Stanford's Persuasive Technologies lab.
Yeah, his background is so relevant.
It really is, because he learned early on that magic relies on exploiting human blind spots. Magicians don't outsmart your raw intelligence, they hack your perceptual weaknesses. And at Stanford, tech designers learned how to apply B.F. Skinner's behavioral reinforcement directly to humans.
Right. Skinner is famous for his pigeon experiments. He found that if you put a pigeon in a box and give it a random, unpredictable reward, like a food pellet, drops only sometimes when it pecks a button, the pigeon just goes crazy.
It creates obsession.
Exactly. The pigeon will peck the button continuously. And tech designers took that exact mechanism and applied it to us via notifications, hearts, and streaks.
The lever is the refresh pull down, and the pellet is a notification.
Bingo. And then you have Asa Raskin, who invented the infinite scroll.
Oh man, the infinite scroll.
Before that, you had to physically click Next Page at the bottom of a website. That click provided a stopping cue, just a microsecond for your prefrontal cortex to pause and ask, do I actually want to keep reading?
But Raskin removed the friction. The feed just continuously loads.
Yeah, and he later calculated that this single feature now consumes an estimated 200,000 human lifetimes every single day.
That is sickening. And to really understand how terrifying this is, we have to look at the voodoo doll model. When you are on a platform, they aren't just serving you random ads. They are tracking every single micro movement you make.
Every single one.
How many milliseconds you linger on a photo of an ex, what headlines make you click, what videos you immediately skip. They take billions of data points to build a precise psychological avatar of you on their servers. A digital voodoo doll.
And then they run millions of simulated tests on your doll to see what specific algorithmic trigger will make you react, get angry, or feel validated. Once they find the exact psychological twitch, they serve that exact trigger to the real you.
But I have to ask, are these tech designers basically supervillains sitting in a volcano lair trying to ruin our brains? Is the destruction of our attention span the actual goal?
No, and that is the tragic irony of this entire ecosystem. They are just trapped by their own business model. Google and Facebook make money based on engagement.
Right. More screen time equals more ad revenue.
And more behavioral data to refine that voodoo doll. As the philosopher James Williams noted, trying to fix this by doing a personal digital detox like putting your phone in a lockbox for the weekend is like wearing a gas mask to fight air pollution.
It protects you for a moment, but it doesn't fix the systemic smog.
Exactly. Individual willpower is not enough to solve an environmental crisis.
So, to wrap up this deep dive, we want to remind you that your shattered attention span is the result of a perfectly designed storm. It's a fire hose of information, systemic sleep deprivation, the loss of deep reading, the eradication of mind wandering, and a tech industry that mines your psychological vulnerabilities for profit.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over that we didn't really cover today. As tech companies move toward brain-computer interfaces and augmented reality, literally integrating the screen into our biology and visual fields, what happens to the voodoo doll?
Oh man, I hadn't even thought of that.
If an engagement-driven algorithm has direct, unfiltered access to our neural pathways, will it no longer just predict our behavior, but actually begin to author our internal monologue before we even consciously think it? How do we protect human agency when the algorithm moves from our hands directly into our heads?
That is a terrifying question to leave off on. If we don't figure out how to reclaim our cognitive environment now, the next time we find ourselves in the jungle room, the interface will be inside our own minds. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.